Hey, I'm back! This is going to be a time-lapse video for part of a scene from Nyancax. Now, I know not everybody likes these kinds of videos, so for people who don't, I've included this to make up for it. See, there's something for everybody. I'm going to try to get right to it here, but if you haven't seen Nyancax yet, you should go watch that first. So this video is going to show how I drew and animated the Malboro from Nyancax. The source video here is about 4 hours long, so obviously I've sped it up quite a bit. It's mostly drawing, so it's pretty straightforward, and this isn't meant to be like a tutorial, but I will be explaining a few things as we go. Before we get started, I should mention that I'm using
Rotoab Falls CS3,
a 12x18
Intuos 2 Wacom tablet,
and
Camtasia
Studio 7. Yeah, I don't really like it very much. Oh, and Sony Vegas 6. Most of this stuff is actually kinda old, but I'm set in my ways and don't give a fuck. So for anyone who doesn't know, a Malboro is a recurring monster from the Final Fantasy series. Despite how they sort of look, they're not any kind of an octopus at all. They're actually supposed to be some sort of a plant. The main thing these assholes do is breathe their nasty shit breath all over you, causing all kinds of status ailments all at the same time, which really fucking sucks. And that's basically what we see happen in Nyancax. Now, since they all look a little bit different from game to game, I had to pick one as a reference point, and while I remember the ones from Final Fantasy VI being really annoying, some of the ones from 12 had these ridiculous crowns and mustaches, which for me made the choice completely obvious. So the first thing to do was find a reference picture, and this was the one from the in-game bestiary, so that's the one I went with. The next thing to do was a sketch of how I wanted the Malboro to appear in the shot. Okay. Up until this point in the cartoon, all of the other parts where Cax is seen getting the food had been done using stills for a more motion graphic kind of feel. So sticking with that idea, the Malboro would still be more of a drawing than an animation, but because there would still be a lot of moving parts, everything would need to be planned out from the very beginning.
So let's go!
Alright, so the first thing to do here is to get the reference drawing on the stage, as I'm basically just going to be tracing it. Now the main thing is that each moving part has to be drawn separately and placed on its own layer. So I'm using the eyes as a starting point, drawing them all on one layer to begin with, but then cutting and pasting them each to separate layers after that. So once all the eye layers are established like this, the next thing to do is go ahead with drawing each of the eye tentacle things, whatever the hell those are supposed to be exactly. And here you can see them all as different colors. For anyone who doesn't know Flash, what that is like a wireframe view. Every layer has its own wireframe color, which is really helpful when working on something with this many parts, especially once everything starts to get colored in. You can use it to get a better look at how everything's fitting together, which is great. So what I'm doing here also with this green line thing is using the pencil tool to close off all of these shapes so that I can fill them in later. Now I use the pencil tool for this to make these temporary lines because when I'm finished with them it's really easy to just delete them all at once. Alright, let me just bring the color picker into the shot here so I can point something out. After doing all the eyes, I'm moving on to the jaws, and see how the outline for the mustache is a lot lighter than the other outlines have been so far. See, it looks like I've been using a black outline for everything, but it's actually a dark green, and for the crown it's a dark red. And I think now I would do these in the same colors, but even lighter shades. Colored outlines were something I first tried out a little bit in Nyancax, but I use them all the time now, and I think because I always used to draw on paper using black ink pens, it sort of felt like it made the most sense when I first started in Flash to use a black outline for everything. But now that I've really gotten used to doing stuff digitally, I find colored outlines just have a much nicer look pretty much across the board. but it's just my opinion, man. You know, so that's what I think about that. With the jaws and the leg tentacle situation, it's the same deal as with the eyes. Every part that moves has to be on its own layer and overlapping in the right order. So some of these are split into a couple parts because of how they move, or because they overlap themselves or whatever. It's a fucking mess. No, it's not that bad. Oh, okay, see that? Okay, hold on, we'll take a look at that again. Okay, so what's happening here when I'm doing this is that I'm drawing a line and then I'm not happy with it, so I'm undoing it and trying again. Sometimes a bunch of times in a row like this until I get it to look how I want it to. Sometimes I'm really picky and I tend to kind of do this a lot, so I found what works really well is setting one of the buttons on the tablet pen to be the undo feature. And I actually use this so much that sometimes now when I'm drawing on paper, in real life, I'll find myself subconsciously going for the undo button on the pen or pencil that I'm using. Which doesn't work, if you were wondering. So now that all the line work is done and all of the sections to be filled in have been closed off using the pencil tool, doing the base colors for all of the parts is actually quite fast. One thing that really boils my shit, though, is this gap size option for the fill tool. I don't know about other Flash versions, but in CS3 it's set to close small gaps by default every time you start the program. This is complete bullshit, because what usually happens when this is selected, ironically, is that it actually creates small gaps in your fills as it tries to close gaps inside the area that you're trying to fill in. I guess this setting could be helpful if you're in a hurry with your line work and aren't bothering to close your areas properly, but otherwise it should always be set to don't close gaps. Unless the desired result is, in fact, tiny little holes all over your entire fucking drawing. Okay, so now just going along and filling everything in with the base colors. Not really much to worry about at this point, so I'll shut up. Here's a cool thing to do. If you're going to be doing any kind of shading, you're usually going to want to establish a light source of some kind, so that your shading makes sense to people when they look at it. Sometimes I like to just draw the imaginary light in just like this, and then it sits there and you don't have to think about it. So, with the lighting kind of figured out, I'm just going along here and dividing areas to be shaded using the pencil tool, and just kind of doing some details as I go using the brush. Woo! here, see? To get rid of all the pencil lines that have built up so far, you just select everything and then choose that no color box. And bam! They're all gone. Once we start getting into a few tones of light and shade, I like to have those colors arranged into like a palette formation like this, so that way I can just grab the colors with the dropper as I need them. It's also a good idea to set the palette aside as a symbol, just put that shit in the library. So then if something happens to it, you just pull out a new one. Bada bing! So that circle thing that I'm messing with here is the gradient control. You don't really get a good sense of it here, but it's a notorious pain in the ass. Now, as a general rule, gradients look like shit, and so some people think that you shouldn't use them ever. But there are actually a lot of cases where they can look great, you just have to use them sparingly and be careful. But I think here it's subtle enough on these eyes that I was able to get away with it. Difficult to see exactly what's going on here, but I'm just going along and adding highlights. It's kind of funny, this is the kind of thing that isn't really obvious unless you see a before and after, but it makes a big difference. Okay, so drawing and coloring and details all done. The next thing to do here is to set all of the separate parts as symbols to get them ready to move around. Everything needs to be on a separate layer for this. As you can see, it's starting to get to be a bit much, but basically at this point, it's just a matter of putting each part into two positions that they'll be moving between. So there's like a position A and a position B for everything. Over a certain number of frames, but it'll seem a little bit more natural if they're not all moving together at the exact same time. So here I'm just making sure that the keyframes, which are the key positions, are a little bit out of sync with each other to give it a bit more of an organic kind of feel. And once that's all set in place, we're ready to take a look at how it's come together. So, there we have it. Some subtle movement here that's kind of reminiscent of the monster motion in some of the later Final Fantasy games. More of a motion graphic than an animated character, which is the kind of look you get from a tweened animation like this. One more time in action. So yeah, thanks for watching. I have some new animations coming next, so check back soon for those. Or for a good time, let's meet up on Facebook.
Or Twitter is a distinct possibility as well. Possibly.
Okay! BBM.